are listening to I Am Refocused Radio with your host, Shamaya Reed. This show is designed to inspire you to live your purpose and regain your focus. And now, here's your host, Shamaya Reed.
Hey, welcome to I Am Refocused Radio. We are here once again, and today, man, we have another awesome show lineup for y'all. We have our special guest. His name is Alex Early. He is the author of this amazing book that's coming out August 22nd. It's called Thinking About God. And we're going to learn a little bit about him because he does a lot of things. And he is also a pastor himself. He's the lead pastor of Redemption Church in Seattle, Washington. And his resume is pretty long. So I'm going to let him do the honors and tell us more about himself. So Alex, how you doing, man?
Hey, man. Thank you so much for having me today. Doing well. All right. So you want me to just go for it? Just tell you a little about myself?
Yeah, man. Before we dive into the book, let people know a little about you.
Yeah. Okay. So like you said, I'm a pastor here in Seattle. I'm married, been married for coming up on 20 years. And got two kids. My kids are ages 13 and 12. And so we got a full life. A bit about my background. I'm 43 years old. I became a Christian about a month before I turned 16. I went to a lot of school, really just trying to figure out my own calling and what God would have me do with my life. And so like a lot of pastors, it takes just a lot of time to really find the place to then steward the gift that God's given you and try to figure out, what am I supposed to be doing as I serve the Lord, and what capacity is that going to look like? And so for me, it took the shape of being a local pastor, an author, and sometimes I'll teach in college or seminary. And so did my undergrad at North Greenville University in Christian Studies, did a MDiv with a specialization in Christian thought theology over at New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary, did another master's degree in hermeneutics at the London School of Theology. And then I completed my Doctorate of Intercultural Studies out here in Portland at Western Seminary a few years ago. And so that's a little bit of my kind of that academic background.
So jump into your book, Thinking About God. That was a project for you. Tell us a little bit what inspired you to write it. What was your core reason and your focus?
Okay. Yeah. Really, I started writing it during the pandemic. So, here in Seattle, I don't know. Certain cities handled the pandemic in different ways, And in Seattle, we went through some pretty extreme kinds of lockdown. Not as extreme as some countries, like say, over in Australia and certain cities, but it was pretty significant. And so one night, though, during one of the nights of serious lockdown, my kids were asking all kinds of questions just about all kinds of stuff. And they got into asking, Dad, what's a theologian? And I started to say, well, here's what a theologian is. It's somebody that thinks about God. And then from there, we started discussing all different kinds of like doctrines and ideas that are presented in Scripture. And as we were doing kind of a Q&A around the table, I asked them just straight up, would it be helpful if I wrote some of this stuff down for you? And they were like, oh yeah, that'd be awesome. So in the mornings before work, I'd get up and I would work for an hour or two on this book that eventually came to be published called Thinking About God. But it really was something I had written for my kids, just trying to put ideas down onto paper, something that would be helpful to equip them to think theologically, And so that's kind of how it came into being. After the book was done, I ended up talking to friends in the publishing world, and one thing led to another, and I got connected with B&H Publishing, a publishing house that I really love and have loved for a lot of years. And they jumped on it right away and said they'd love to publish this book. And they asked, would I be willing to work with them a little bit on changing the format of it? And I was more than down to do that. And so we just kind of worked back and forth, batting the idea around with the content pretty much already written. And we formatted it into what it is today. And it'll be hitting the shelves next week.
You listen on Refocus Radio, talking to our guest today, Alex Early. And man, your book is written in a Q&A style. How did you and your team come to that conclusion that you wanted to be in that simple format for the young readers? Because it really appeals to all ages.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and it is a thing that I really think like parents or grandparents or Sunday school teachers or, people that are involved in the lives of children and their own spiritual formation is something that I think adults will actually benefit from too. So anyway, how did we get to the format itself? It really was through dialoguing with the publisher themselves, going back and forth with a couple of people saying, hey, you wrote this chapter and you're answering these, 3 questions, basically. Would it be all right if we kind of just asked those questions and put those questions kind of more bluntly before the reader? I was like, oh yeah. So that's kind of how that conversation got going. And so that's a little bit of what that process looked like.
I mean, there's some heavy topics as well in the book as well, like why did Jesus die? ? When you talk about these heavy topics, how were you? Well, I would say, how were you? What was your game plan to break it down so that it was simple to understand for young people?
Yeah. Well, I grew up in church, but I never heard words like doctrine or theology, and like a lot of people. But by the time when I went to, college and seminary and I was taking all these theology classes, I was blown away and going, man, why is this the first time I'm actually hearing about this stuff, And there's a lot of ways in which people can go about talking about God and the Bible and how it relates to our world. And so for me, I decided I'm going to use some of that more kind of complex language and go ahead and just define the words for the kids and speak to them as though they can really understand. And they can, And so the heart behind it was to try to just give a warm welcome into the world of theological thought early on in life, rather than it being something that they could get to, later when they're, quote, old enough. You know what I mean? And so the how, honestly, that's a good question. It was a lot of hard work. For anybody that works with kids, my mom's was an elementary school teacher. My brother's a school teacher. I have a whole new amount of respect for people who teach kids every day, because it's easier to talk to adults. In fact, it's easier to write a dissertation for academics to critique than it is to actually write good theology for kids, because you're trying to find ways to articulate a very big idea in a very accessible way without dumbing it down or saying something that isn't totally accurate, So for me, man, it took a lot of hours, honestly, trying to find a way. How do you boil this down and yet stay true to what you would, to say the truth, So it's a lot of hard work.
I mean, also, like, looking through the book, like you said, you don't dumb it down. You use scriptures to back up what you're saying. So it's not just colorful, like, language, abstract language. You really are hitting points and points and points and illustrating with graphics as well. So at the end of the chapter, you have a graphic, but you also have a to think about, and it's like a series of questions. Explain your concept of that and how that helps drive it home for the kids.
Yeah. Well, in the sections that are to think about, I wanted to do some kind of discipleship, some spiritual formation stuff with the kids to go, okay, you just learned about this doctrine of whatever, the doctrine of the Holy Spirit or the resurrection or whatever. You just learned about what the Bible has to say. But I wanted to drive it home a bit more and go, so how does that apply to you? You know, when we think about forgiveness, have you wronged somebody? Has somebody ever wronged you? What did that look like? Did you say you were sorry? Did they say they were sorry? And when you forgave them, what did that feel like? You know, like trying to put some kind of shoe leather on these ideas rather than just let them live in the abstract, you know? And so that's some of the heart behind, those summary kind of questions, to give them something, as maybe if they're reading before bed, to give them something to fall asleep thinking about, you know?
Once again, listen on Refocus Radio, talking to our guest, Alex Early. And you can get his book, Thinking About God. It comes out August 22nd. And when you look at today's culture, and we all know we've been hitting the nail on the head probably since podcasts have been invented, but there's always, quote unquote, distractions. And there's so many things that young people can turn to give their attention towards. How does this book kind of help them have a foundation of how they manage their way of spending time?
How does this book help them manage the way they spend their time? Yeah,
like when they put their effort and time into, you know, different things. How does this book help them have a better foundation?
Yeah, I think it's the aim is to help. The aim of good theology is to help somebody like rightly orient themselves to God, to themselves, the world in which they find themselves. And so how this lays a foundation, it begins to help them see, hey, you didn't just appear out of nowhere, but rather you have a creator. And he's designed you to live in creation as a limited, finite human being that's dependent on God, and that you're going to be dependent on others, and others are going to be dependent on you. And so it's laying this foundation that life isn't just you live on your phone. Like you're talking about being distracted. Like life is not this thing that you live completely independently, but rather you live completely dependent upon God and the world around you, you know? And so it's laying this foundation to see the story of God as it changes you as an individual, and then what your response is to be in the world as you go about rightly thinking about God.
I like the point about the story because, once again, we live in a culture where it's like a stigma to call yourself Christian or to not be cool because you have this label on you, and it gets real quickly religious to a point. How do you think people should approach this book as a tool to kind of tear that, you know, stigma away and say, hey, it's kind of cool to have this personal relationship?
Yeah. Gosh, yeah. Well, we do live in a day and age where we're talking constantly about our identity and how people identify, you know? And this is at the bedrock of what it means to to know God, is to begin to embrace, I am made in his image. That is who I am. I am an image bearer of God. And beyond that, I'm a disciple of Jesus Christ. And this is not new or unique. I think to speak to that, you know, what you said, like, how is this, you know, cool? I think, man, I am connecting my faith to people. My faith is not my own or independently, you know, like I'm connected to a global church that's thousands of years old, with people with white skin and black skin and brown skin, right? And we're with people from literally all over the globe, speaking all kinds of languages, of all kinds of cultures, with all kinds of music and food and art and fashion and so on going. And the church belongs in all of these cultures, you know, and you are a part of a global family that's ancient. I can't think of anything more relevant, you know?
In your book, I believe you also you discuss about church in itself, since you hit that. A lot of times you hear about don't feel like going today, just not in the mood. Touch a little bit, a teaser of what you talk about in the book, the importance of church community.
Yeah. Well, because I mean, when you think about church community, it's not something that you do on your own. Like, you don't do your faith on your own. Like, there's a communion table that's not a table for one, it's meant for the global church to be taking part of. And so I want kids to understand that the reality is there's times we don't want to go to church. There's times we want to do something else. I get that. At the same time, I've yet to meet a Christian who's growing on their own. You know what I mean? Like, when someone is walking completely by themselves and saying, like, well, I've got this personal relationship with God and I don't need the church, I think a careful and close reading of the scripture would say that idea is totally foreign, that you actually need the church, and you need your friends, and you need leaders around you guiding you and shaping you and pushing you along as you follow Jesus.
And the reason I bring that up, because that's also a pretty hot subject in today's climate. You hear a lot of people saying, well, I'm going to just stream it. I'm going to just go on the holidays. I'm good with God. God's good with me. And without step on people's toes, from your personal experience, how have you seen the benefits of making sure you're connected to other believers, so that way iron sharpens iron, you're not dull, but you're excited about your walk?
Yeah. I mean, yes, you can sit at home and you can download a podcast over here, and you could stream a song over there, and you can, read this devotional book published by so and so. Like, yes, you can do all those things and curate your own little world of, I read this publisher, I listen to this artist, this is my favorite pastor, and so on. And those are all supplements, and sure, do those things, of course. And Jesus gave us the church. And when Jesus came here, he didn't send a ghost, He came down here in flesh and blood and built the church himself with real people face to face. And then when you read the New Testament, you see the New Testament writers constantly saying things when they couldn't gather together because someone was in prison, or, for example, like Paul, he would say things like, I long to come to you. I want to be with you face to face. Or John even says, I wish I didn't have to write this with pen and paper, but I'd rather be with you face to face. That there is something about being together that God has hardwired into the Christian experience, that you need other people around you, helping you grow in your faith, rather than curating your own little individual private religion, in which you may not actually be challenged in the same way that you would be, say, if you're in community. In fact, you won't be challenged in the same way. If you go to a community, if you go to a church, those people are all going to be sinners under that same roof. And they're probably going to upset you from time to time. And they're going to also bless you and encourage you. And so the idea is that we need one another so that we would grow,
Once again, listen on Refocus Radio, talking to our guest, Alex Early. You can go visit his website. It's easy as paearly.com. And also get ready for the book that's coming out on August 22nd, Thinking About God. And that's a great title, man. Thinking About God, I feel like is something you can't do it once a year or once in your life. It's a continuous practice. For you, after writing the book, how has your kids reacted to the book, and have they gained any new ideas and how they want to grow their relationship?
Yeah. We actually just started reading it as a family. We talked about the ideas while I was writing it here and there, But we actually just started sitting down at the dining table and reading it together, and they are enjoying it. Like the book begins with talking about the Trinity and thinking and living and storytelling, and so our kids began to start asking questions immediately about the Trinity and going, okay, hold on. They're three, but they're one. Let's talk about this. And so it's doing what it's designed to do. So they're excited about it. They were encouraged by it. And I've even asked them at the end at the end of chapter 1 going, okay, did that make sense? Be honest with me, because this is heading out into the world, And they were like, oh yeah, this makes great sense. I'm like, okay, if it's passing the kid test, then that's a win,
Yeah, that's true. I have 2 nephews, and they will not lie. They will tell you straight up if your breath stinks, if they don't feel like doing this or doing that. They are not shy at all. And it feels like when we get older, we tend to hide those things. We just want to go with the flow and be easygoing. But back to your book, you end the book with, paraphrasing it, but you basically say, take this knowledge and let it change how you read the Bible, how you treat people, and the way you live. And kind of touch on that, because that kind of ties to what I was saying about laying the foundation. How important is it for people I feel like grown people can benefit from reading this book as well, not just forcing the kids to read it, but I think a lot of people, all ages, can learn some valuable points from this.
Yeah. I mean, good theology, like when you read through the book of Romans, Paul does all this heavy lifting theology, the first 11 chapters. And then in chapter 12, he begins to get very practical in how we should treat one another and how we should live in the world. And so it just goes to show that the point of good theology is to then put itself into practice. Do something. This is not like a private religion that we do with God alone in our head, but it's something that has tangible, physical. We give demonstration to our faith by how we live in the world, And so the idea is to go ahead and start putting those ideas in front of kids sooner than later, so that they don't grow up just thinking like, oh, God is something I celebrate in my mind or in my heart, but my living relationship with God has an impact on how I actually carry out my own life in this world.
Those are good points, because if you look at just how the book is formatted, and it, to me, going through it, it just makes me think about the value of connection. And I'm not the person that is too high on being religious, but I feel like that personal relationship is golden, is key. So when you think about what Christ did to give everything for us, maybe that's part of what he expects us to do, is to give back with others. Because like your point where you're talking about not keeping it private, because you think of like a baseball player or athlete, they don't play on the game by themselves. There's so many people on that team that helps them play the game.
That's exactly it. So we're designed that's exactly it. We're designed to grow in community, and our faith is intended to be lived out, not just something that lives just in our minds. And so that's why there's so much application stuff throughout this book, because I think the tendency is to want to just live in our heads. And yet God is saying, no, I need you to live in this world,
Last thing I'll say is this, because I think it's important to mention. When you hear about the whole topic of church hurt people, what would be your message to them? How could this book kind of help them reset their thoughts on the idea of church?
Having been hurt by the church, myself a couple of times, and we all know a lot of people that have been hurt by the church. I suppose that in one way this book might speak to that, though it wasn't written with that intention. I think It's about getting back to the basics that are genuinely mind-blowing. And in these mind-blowing ideas about God being triune, Jesus being the Son that was crucified and resurrected, the Spirit of God indwelling. And so all of these things are genuinely mind-blowing. And going back and rooting ourselves there, that reorients our minds and, God willing, our heart to then go, okay, yeah, the church is a mess. The church is a disaster in many ways. It really is. And yet the church is Christ's bride. And the church is for whom Jesus died. And the reality is that for all the ugly that comes through certain people that call on the name of Christ and call him their Lord and yet turn around and live another way, the Bible calls those people out. Sound doctrine calls those people out. And the assurance of salvation tells us, like at the end, even in the end of this book, the church will not always be a place of just sinners that hurt each other. The church will be renewed and glorified one day. And so it's in the meantime that we labor toward that end. And so for those that have been wounded, my hope would be to go, yes, as you read that, if you've been wounded by somebody in the church, my hope is that if you're reading this, that you're going, but these things are still true, you know? And it doesn't excuse those people that did the wounding, but I'm going to root myself in something outside of this one experience or two experiences, and they can be terrible experiences with people in the church, but I'm going to root myself in something deeper and truer, namely, who is God and what has God done? And I'm going to strive toward that end.
We're talking to Alex Early here on Refocus Radio. You can get his book that comes out August 22nd. It is Thinking About God. You can also visit his website. It's paearly.com. Last thing is, what call to action would you want listeners to do outside of the book to keep supporting you?
Keep supporting me. Please pray for me. Please pray for me. You know, being a pastor is tough, and Seattle is hard, and staying faithful. And that's how to pray toward that end, and drop me a line, message me on the website. And I'd love to just stay in touch with people who are buying the book and reading. If I can be of any help to the readers along the way, I want to do just that.
Awesome. Well, once again, go get his book that drops on August 22nd, Thinking About God, and visit his website, paearly.com. Thanks again, Pastor Alex Early, for your time.
Yep, you bet. Thank you.